FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Congressman Tim Walz from Minnesota's 1st District, thank you for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here.
For starters, can you tell us a little bit about your district and the kinds of agriculture we might find in it?
Yeah, well, I'm lucky enough and honored enough to represent Minnesota's 1st Congressional District. It spans all of southern Minnesota from the border of South Dakota by Sioux Falls all the way over to the Mississippi River at Winona. Leading producer, corn producer, soybean producer, nation leader in pork, turkey, dairy, a lot of specialty crops now, canning. We're home of Del Monte and, of course, the Valley of the Green Giant. And so we are one of the 10 largest agricultural districts in America. We have some of the richest soil. I would say we have some of the most productive farmers in the world, and also some of the best stewards of the land. So it's a responsibility that I take seriously. My work on the Ag Committee, I think, reflects that district, and then of course all of the peripheral jobs that come with it, from Hormel on, that makes southern Minnesota. There's a reason we have low unemployment rates and high medium incomes, and it all stems from our core business, which is agriculture.
And you mentioned the House Agriculture Committee. I'd like to talk a little bit about your work on that committee. You're currently serving in your fifth term here in Washington.
Yeah.
Been serving on the House Agriculture Committee for all of that time. What is kind of the one biggest lesson that you've learned throughout the course of your time serving on the House Agriculture Committee?
That our agricultural districts trump politics, and it still holds true. I think at a time when Americans are rightfully frustrated with partisan politics, our commodities and our desire to work together to make sure our producers are able to do what they do holds true. And I think that's a lesson, not just in getting good farm policy, it's a lesson in how our democracy could work better. So I am proud of my fellow members of the committee, and it's really fun in there, and I think interesting that it's much more regional than it is political. So Midwestern folks, sometimes we have some heated arguments with the rice and cotton guys, and the Western producers have issues with us over things. But I think that's a healthy dynamic, and that's why we get farm bills done. In this day and age, getting anything that big done is virtually impossible. We find a way to get farm bills done. So I think the lesson I've learned there is that what's possible when we work together for a common good is pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've seen a couple of farm bills in your day go through that committee. We're kind of headed into another debate on another farm bill. As we go into that debate, and as you potentially work with your colleagues on it, what are kind of the main priorities that you have that you would like to see out of the next farm bill?
Yeah, I'm proud of the last farm bill we did. During that one, I was ranking member on the conservation piece of it, and I think we got a very good conservation title and struck a proper balance, of course, led by our producers. So there's this myth that it's conservationists versus producers. They're one and the same in many cases. This time, I think, and I've spent the last couple cycles working on risk management and general commodities, and I still believe strong risk management tools are the key to the farm bill. And we knew it last time. We were writing the farm bill at record high prices. Things were sailing along pretty good. I think any of your listeners who've been in this business know that was not going to last long. We said it at the time. There's a danger in writing a farm bill in good times because you write it for the bad. So I think the lesson I took is that I'm absolutely committed to making sure those risk management tools remain solid. I think we need to build on them. Not all of it was perfect. I think the county by county arc, as many of your folks know, is difficult, challenging, and I think there's some things we can do there. And I don't think we did enough for dairy in getting that right. So I think focusing on that, of course, I still remain committed to our next generation of farmers. The issue of capital hits hardest with them, of how do we get new folks into it, and then how do we use our newest science, from biotech to working on land and soil conservation. I think those things are at the center of it.
Let's shift gears a little bit here away from agriculture and talk about your military experience. You served in the National Guard in Nebraska and Minnesota for many, many years, and you're one of 81 members in the House that served or are serving currently in the military. With those numbers, there's 435 members in the House. Do you think the military and veterans are adequately represented in this chamber?
Well, there's an interesting thing. I don't think you have to be a veteran to work hard for that, and I think the American public is unified over our care for that, but it's just like anything. If you have some experience, experience in it. We're at the lowest number of members since World War II, but that's also true of the general public. So actually, strangely enough, the percentage of members of Congress is actually higher than the general population. We've got about 20% of our members, not quite, and in the general population it's about 10. But what I think that does is, once again, much like agriculture, it unifies us together both from a national security perspective and from a care of veterans. I'm proud of the work we've done there. I take it as I was an enlisted soldier for all those years, and care of troops and making sure they have the right equipment is paramount. So I think people get it. I do think these are challenging and difficult subjects that we have to, as a nation, have debate on, striking the balance between security and privacy. What's the role of the United States in guaranteeing stability in the world? Because again, when people say it's none of our business what's happened there, it is our business what happens in the South China Sea, because freedom of navigation to move our crops and to move our products is critically important to our economy as well as our national security. So I think we need to stay engaged. I think American leadership and American values should lead that way, and I'm certainly proud to be part of both the Armed Services Committee and the VA in addition to agriculture.
So for this interview series, we typically focus on members that have an agricultural focus to their service, to their district, what have you. So there's some committees that we don't have much overlap in with the House Agriculture Committee. And one of the areas that you serve in Congress is something that I haven't come across before in this interview series, and that's the Congressional Executive Commission on China. What can you tell us about that body and the work that you guys do specifically as it relates to the U.S. and China relationship?
Yeah, and it really overlaps. Well, thank you for asking the question. There's 9 of us, 9 members of the House and Senate. Bipartisan that are appointed to that, 9 members of the executive branch there are too, and the focus of that came into being after we normalized trade relations with China. We got rid of most favored nation status and normalized trade relations to try and keep a focus that we'll trade with China, but they have to play by the rules, both from an environmental, from a fair trade, and also from a human rights perspective. And one of the things we've been focusing on, and I lived in China, and as I said, I've been there about 30 times, but if someone tells you they're an expert on China, they're probably not telling you the truth, because it's a complex country. But it's critically important for us. I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship. I totally disagree, and I think we need to stand firm on what they're doing in the South China Sea. But there's many areas of cooperation that we can work on. And when I was in China this past November, I got to have supper with their agricultural minister and talked about the issues. And some of the issues that were facing him were the same things facing us: GMO labeling, some of the issues of lower land price or for lower commodity prices as land prices rose. And I think it's critically important, and I think that is an overlap. Why that's a human rights focused commission. It has opened, I think, channels of collaboration that I've been able to talk to the Chinese, because when we're on the same sheet of music, the world's, 2 of the world's great superpowers, there's many collaborative things we can do together. So I'm hopeful on that, because China's got 1.3 billion people to feed, and we're glad to produce food that they can buy, and I think that can strengthen our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's not always like this in Congress, but in a lot of cases, members of Congress are serving the area where they grew up. Yeah. You're kind of an exception to that rule. Born and raised in Nebraska, but ended up serving in Congress in what is your wife's home state of Minnesota. Correct. Was there a bit of a learning curve, learning kind of some of the bigger issues for the state of Minnesota versus the state of Nebraska? And was your wife able to help you out on that?
Yeah, she was, and I did follow my wife there. I always use the line that you can't choose where you were born, but you can choose where you live. I'm proud of my heritage in Nebraska. My family still has a farm that's I believe about 130 years old now, and a lot of my uncles and cousins and my mom's still there. But I think there were a lot of the same issues. I think my wife, there's a little difference amongst Minnesotans. They speak a little different than me. They can sometimes hear my Nebraska accent. And I grew up and spent time in western Nebraska, which is, those who know geography, is quite a bit different. That's ranch country. We had high school rodeo teams in addition to the football team I coached. And so, no, I think it's very similar. The one thing I found is, and I tell people this, that I think if you're trying to find things that bind us together, you find a lot more of those than find the differences. And I am convinced that that politics is nothing more than relationships. I certainly think when someone asks me, and I'm always a little bit, it's interesting how when people identify you and they talk to you, if they know you're a politician, they lead with what party you're from. And I said, I don't think if I introduced myself, I would lead with that. I'm a teacher, a father, a retired soldier, a bad golfer, just different things that who you are as a person. And I think in the Midwest, there's a lot more to that. So a lot of the same traits and the same values that were there. So.
I'll wrap up with this one. As I mentioned earlier, you're a fifth-term congressman, currently campaigning for a sixth, so you've kind of got the lay of the land here in Washington, D.C. So with that in mind, if I were to give you the power to change one thing about how Congress, the House, Washington in general operates, what would that be and why?
I would change the redistricting process to make more districts 50-50 so that there would be more incentive to compromise. I think I think when our districts are so safe that the only real threat comes if you compromise with the other side, you get primaried. I think I hear a lot of times throw all the bums out. Well, there's a whole new set of bums coming if you don't. I think you get districts where there's such a strong desire, and I understand clearly I represent that 40% or whatever it ends up being that doesn't vote for me. I have a responsibility to represent them with the same vigor. And I think when you have these districts be closer to that, and there's very few of them left, it used to be 300 of our districts were swing districts, could go either way. That's down to about 50. And what that creates is that the people who stay here for decades are in safe districts and they don't have to compromise with the other side. And what you find is there's probably about, as I said, 50 or 60 of us that play between the 30-yard lines where most people live their lives. They're center left, center right at different times during the day. And so my thing that I would do if I could wave a magic wand, and I think the Supreme Court agreed last summer that maybe that's the way to go, just make the districts fairer and then have a heated and spirited debate.
Congressman Tim Walz from Minnesota's 1st District, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.